All right, get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into something truly amazing, the Maha Kumbh Mela 2025 in Prayagraj.
That's a deep dive I'm definitely looking forward to. A powerful mix of religious devotion and an economic boom that's difficult to even imagine.
Yeah, you're telling me. Think about it. A pop-up city the size of a small country, packed with something like 450 million devotees, and then it's gone a few weeks later. The Kumbh Mela in a nutshell. And this one, the Maha Kumbh, it's the biggest there is.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's just as much a logistical feat as it is a spiritual pilgrimage.
Absolutely. We've got reports on everything, from the intense security measures to the massive economic activity this event creates. And of course, we can't forget the heart of it, all the religious rituals. You'll practically be an expert yourself by the time we're done with this deep dive.
That's the goal. We want you to come away with more than just some facts and figures, though. We want you to really get the essence of this one-of-a-kind event, why it's so important, what it means, and just how enormous it really is.
Okay, so let's start with a little story time. Every big event has to start somewhere, right? So tell us about it. What's the story behind the Kumbh Mela?
Well, we've got to go all the way back to a cosmic showdown, gods versus demons, battling it out for Amrit, which is the nectar of immortality. Just picture them churning this primordial ocean in this epic struggle we know as the Samudra Manthan.
Wow, talk about high stakes. So what happened? Did they manage to get this Amrit?
So from this churning, a kumbh came up, which is a pot, holding that precious nectar. Lord Vishnu wanted to protect this elixir and make sure it didn't end up in the wrong hands, so he took off with it.
Ah, a divine escape. I guess that makes sense.
As he was flying across the sky, the story goes that some drops of this Amrit fell down to the earth, landing in 4 specific spots: Prayagraj, Haridwar, Ujjain, and Nashik.
No way. Those are the exact places where the Kumbh Mela is held, right? It all comes together.
That's right. It's believed that those drops gave these locations some incredible spiritual power, making them sacred pilgrimage destinations for Hindus.
So is that why millions of people believe that if they bathe at the point where these rivers meet, especially during the Kumbh Mela, that their sins will be washed away? Because they're tapping into that energy.
Exactly. It's a chance to cleanse yourself physically and spiritually. At its heart, the Kumbh Mela is a lively celebration of this old myth, a way to connect with that profound spiritual energy.
Okay, well, let's shift gears for a second and talk about something a bit more concrete numbers. It's predicted that this Maha Kumbh Mela will attract somewhere between 400 and 450 million people. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of the United States.
It really is astounding. To make room for that many people, they've basically built an entire temporary megacity. We're talking 150,000 tents spread out over 4,000 hectares of land, with 12 kilometers of bathing ghats built just for this event.
It's almost like a city just appearing out of nowhere, all powered by faith. Talk about an event on an epic scale.
Logistically, it's massive. It really makes you realize just how much it takes to pull this off.
And speaking of pulling things off, we've got to mention the money involved in this.
Yeah.
An event this big has to have a huge economic impact, right?
Absolutely. The estimates are that this Maha Kumbh Mela could create something like 2.5 lakh crore in economic activity. That's maybe 0.8% of India's entire GDP. It just shows how powerful religious devotion and economic forces can be when they come together on a scale this big.
Whoa, hold on a second. I need to process that for a minute. That's a serious amount of money. And to think, it all comes back to this deeply rooted spiritual event.
That's the interesting thing about the Kumbh Mela, isn't it? Domestic and international tourists, all the money they spend on everything from hotels and food to religious offerings, it all contributes to this surge in economic activity.
It's amazing to think about the impact of this, from the local tea sellers to all of the massive infrastructure projects that had to be completed to make this event possible.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem. It really highlights the amount of planning and work it takes to manage something this large.
And since we're on the topic of planning, security for a crowd this size has to be a huge undertaking. What are they doing to keep millions of people safe?
Security is the biggest priority, especially with this many people. They're using a multi-layered approach that combines some cutting-edge technology with a large network of security personnel.
So what does this high-tech security look like?
Okay, picture this. AI-powered surveillance systems with thousands of cameras, drones patrolling from the sky, and even underwater drones monitoring the rivers.
Hold up. Underwater drones. I definitely wouldn't have expected that.
It's actually pretty smart when you think about it. It's so important to keep everyone safe during the Shahi Snan, which is the royal bath. These underwater drones can check the riverbed for anything that could be dangerous and make sure the millions of people who are participating can bathe safely.
That's really impressive. What about security on the ground? How do they manage a crowd that big?
They're going to have over 45,000 police officers on the Mela grounds working with paramilitary forces and specialized units. They're also going to have a lot of police stations and checkpoints to make sure they can manage the flow of people and respond quickly if something happens.
So it sounds like they're doing everything they can to make sure this is a safe event.
You bet. And it's not just about stopping crime. They're also focused on managing the crowds, fire safety, and emergency response. Think strategically placed fire stations with top-notch equipment and a strong communication network to coordinate emergency services without a hitch.
That's incredible. It's like they're building a whole city's worth of infrastructure and planning for just a few weeks.
And don't forget, all of this is going on at the same time as this deeply spiritual event. It's really interesting how it combines ancient and modern elements, technology, and spirituality. Welcome back to our look at the Maha Kumbh Mela in 2025.
We're picking up right where we left off, looking at how this event brings together faith, logistics, and economics.
We've talked about just how big it is, the security that's in place, and even touched on some of the important rituals.
But there's still a lot more to discover, trust me. It's kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And speaking of uncovering layers, let's talk about some of the rituals that happen during the Kumbh Mela, aside from the famous Shahi Snan.
I'm ready to hear more. What else do these millions of pilgrims actually do during this gathering?
Well, the Kumbh Mela is more than just bathing in the holy rivers. It's about really getting into spiritual reflection, showing your devotion, and making a deep connection with the divine.
So it's not just a passive experience.
Not at all. You'll see pilgrims taking part in all kinds of things, from chanting mantras and singing devotional songs that fill the air to taking part in yagnas, which are these ancient fire rituals with a deep spiritual meaning.
Yagnas, what are those exactly?
Sure. Yagnas are these elaborate fire rituals that are done according to the Vedic scriptures. Think of it as a symbolic offering to the gods, where they make offerings into a sacred fire while chanting and praying.
So it's a really active way of showing your spirituality.
Exactly. You're not just watching from the sidelines. You're completely immersed in this vibrant spiritual atmosphere, asking for blessings and doing things that are meant to purify your mind and soul.
I can only imagine how energetic the atmosphere must be with all of that devotion and energy concentrated in one place.
It's really something to see. Imagine the sound of chanting all around you, the smell of incense, the sight of sadhus, who are holy men, meditating by the river in their saffron robes. It's a sensory experience that's totally different from anything else.
And it's not just about what individuals do, right? There's also a strong feeling of community throughout the event.
Absolutely. The Kumbh Mela brings together people from all walks of life, united by their faith. You'll see pilgrims sharing stories, meals, and even helping each other out. It's a beautiful example of human connection and shared devotion.
It sounds like a miniature version of humanity coming together in this sacred space.
In a way, it is. It reminds us that even though we're different, we're all connected by something bigger than ourselves, by our faith and our desire to grow spiritually.
Speaking of challenges, we mentioned earlier how difficult it must be to manage an event of this scale logistically. This temporary city is practically the size of a small country.
Yeah, it's a massive task. Just think about how hard it must be to plan and provide things like food, water, sanitation, and healthcare to millions of people, all in a temporary setting.
It's mind-blowing. How do they even start?
It all begins with the basics, building a strong infrastructure. They have to set up temporary housing, build roads and bridges, and make sure there's a reliable supply of electricity and water. It's like building a city from scratch in just a few months.
And then there's the huge task of managing the crowds and keeping millions of people moving safely and efficiently.
That's definitely a top priority, especially during the Shahi Snan when everyone's going to the bathing ghats. The authorities use a multi-layered approach with designated routes, strategically placed barriers, and tons of volunteers to guide the crowds.
It's really impressive how organized and dedicated they are.
Right, and it's not just about managing the crowds during the busy times. It's about making sure people can move around smoothly throughout the entire Mela, from the moment they arrive to when they leave.
What about keeping things sanitary? With so many people in one place, that must be a huge concern.
Definitely a top priority. It's super important to maintain hygiene and sanitation in a temporary setting like this to prevent diseases from spreading. The authorities have been working hard to provide enough toilets, implement effective waste management systems, and run public awareness campaigns to encourage good hygiene practices.
It's good to know they're making that a priority.
Absolutely. The health and well-being of everyone involved, both the pilgrims and the people who live in the area, are really important.
We've talked about the mythology, the rituals, the impact on the economy, the security, and all the logistical difficulties. Now I want to switch gears and think about the bigger picture.
I'm listening.
With the Kumbh Mela getting bigger and bigger every time, how do you see this event changing in the future?
That's a great question. As we've seen, the Kumbh Mela is already a massive event, and it seems to be growing every time it happens.
Right, so can it keep growing like this forever? What do you think?
That's something the authorities are trying to figure out. There's growing concern about the environmental impact, the strain on resources, and whether it's even possible to manage bigger and bigger crowds.
So what are some of the ideas they're considering to solve these problems?
One thing they're thinking about is spreading out the bathing dates over a longer period of time. This would help reduce congestion on the busiest days and take some of the pressure off the infrastructure and resources.
That sounds like a good idea. Spreading the crowds out would definitely make things easier.
Another interesting idea is using technology more effectively, maybe even virtual reality, to create immersive experiences. This could reduce the need for people to physically be there for certain parts of the Mela and give people who can't travel there a way to participate.
Wow, a virtual Kumbh Mela. That's a really cool concept.
It's definitely something worth exploring. In the end, the future of the Kumbh Mela depends on finding the right balance between keeping its spiritual significance and making sure it can continue in the long run.
It's like walking a tightrope between tradition and progress.
Exactly. And it's going to take innovation, collaboration, and a deep understanding of both the spiritual and practical sides of this incredible event.
You're right. This has been a really informative conversation. I feel like I have a much better understanding of how complex and fascinating the Kumbh Mela is.
Yeah, it's an event that never fails to amaze and inspire. It really shows the lasting power of faith and human connection.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to the economic impact for a minute. We talked about the overall numbers, but I'm interested in knowing which specific sectors benefit from all this economic activity.
You bring up a good point. It's not just about how much money is being spent, it's about understanding where that money is going.
Exactly. Who benefits from all these people and all this spending?
Well, the economic impact is pretty widespread. The people who benefit the most right away are usually the communities that live in and around the Mela grounds.
Like local businesses, the street food vendors, the artisans selling religious items. They all see a big increase in their income.
Exactly. The Kumbh Mela gives them a great chance to earn a lot of money in a short amount of time.
And it's not just about individual businesses doing well. The government also gets more tax revenue.
That's true. All the tourists and the increased economic activity during the Mela bring in a lot of money for local and state economies through taxes and fees.
It's amazing how this ancient religious gathering has such a big ripple effect on the modern economy.
It shows how connected different parts of society really are. And it's important to remember that the economic impact lasts even after the Mela is over.
Really? How so?
Well, the improvements they make to the infrastructure to get ready for the Kumbh Mela often benefit the host city for years to come.
Like the new roads, bridges, and better sanitation facilities.
Yep. Those improvements not only make the city's overall infrastructure better, but they can also attract more investment and tourism down the road.
So it's like a catalyst for development.
In a lot of ways, yes. It focuses attention and investment on developing the city's infrastructure and leaves a positive impact that lasts.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's not just about the immediate economic boost. It's also about the legacy of the Kumbh Mela.
Exactly. It's about creating a sustainable model that benefits both the pilgrims looking for spiritual peace and the host community looking to grow and develop.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? We've explored the mythology, the rituals, the economics, the logistics, and even thought about what the future holds for this unique event.
It's been an amazing journey into the heart of the Kumbh Mela.
And we're back for the last part of our deep dive into the Kumbh Mela.
It's been a really interesting journey, hasn't it? We've gone from ancient myths to some pretty amazing numbers, and we've even gotten a peek at what it takes to actually put this event together.
It really changes how you think about it, doesn't it? This isn't just a gathering. It's like a temporary city built on faith. And it's a fascinating mix of old and new.
It's been eye-opening, for sure. As we wrap up, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember? What really stuck with you?
I think what really hit home for me is the sheer scale and importance of this event. The Maha Kumbh Mela isn't just some festival on a calendar. It's a global phenomenon that draws in millions of people who all share this desire for spiritual connection and renewal.
I completely agree. It shows how powerful belief can be and how traditions that have lasted for centuries can still have such a strong pull. And what's especially interesting is how closely connected the religious and secular aspects of the Kumbh Mela are.
Yeah, it's like a microcosm of modern India itself,
Yeah.
trying to balance tradition and progress. We've seen how the Kumbh Mela creates a huge economic impact, faces massive logistical challenges, and needs incredibly tight security, all while keeping its core spiritual essence.
Exactly. And that brings me to another key takeaway, the Kumbh Mela's ability to adapt and change. We talked about some pretty innovative solutions they're considering, like spreading out the bathing dates to reduce crowding, and maybe even using virtual reality so more people can experience it.
It's exciting to think about how this ancient tradition might continue to thrive in our digital age. It's a fascinating challenge to find ways to preserve its essence while embracing new approaches.
It is. It's about finding that sweet spot between preserving the heart of the Kumbh Mela and addressing the very real challenges of managing an event this big. And it requires a deep understanding of both what the pilgrims are looking for spiritually and the practical realities on the ground.
Before we let our listeners go, I want to leave them with something to think about. We've looked at the Kumbh Mela from all these different angles, but there's one thing we haven't really touched on, what it's like for the individual.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Just imagine yourself for a second as one of those millions of pilgrims, standing shoulder to shoulder, feeling the energy of this ancient ritual. What would you be looking for? What would you be feeling? How would this change your understanding of faith and humanity?
That's a really powerful question to think about, and it brings us back to what this event is all about, the individual journey. It's a reminder that beyond the crowds and the complexity, the Kumbh Mela is ultimately about personal transformation and connection.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the Maha Kumbh Mela 2025. It's been great to explore this topic with you.
Until next time, may your own journeys be filled with discovery and wonder.